Well, it's still winter here in Tassie, but the signs of spring have arrived. The wattle trees are just beginning to come into blossom, and things like the plum trees are not very far from bursting open. And the next week, they'll probably open too. For me, that's a sign that I need to start planting. What I'm planting at this time of the year is things that can still handle some cold, that will appreciate the rains that we're still getting, and that are not going to be sensitive if we do get some frost still. And there's still a high likelihood that we will get frosts for up to another 2 months. So I've got quite a range of seeds and also some young plants that I want to try and get into the garden today. Yesterday we had a lot of heavy rain, and so the ground is really wet, and it's still overcast today. I might get an occasional shower to interrupt things. So I've got a few beds here that are empty that I can plant into. I'm going to concentrate on this bed today. Now, one of the reasons why this garden is so empty at the moment is that I really need to do some maintenance on the garden boxes. The timber really needs a repaint. I started a couple of weeks ago on some of these, but the rain just hasn't given me a chance. It rained too soon after I painted and it washed some of the paint off. So I really need about 3 days of fine weather to be able to get in and actually get these painted. And I need to do it at a time when there's not many plants in, because it's really hard to get at these edges when there's lots of plants around in the road. But it's just not giving me a chance. So I really need to plant. That's a priority. These are not going to become too big too quickly, what I put in here, so I still can do it if I need to, if the opportunity actually comes along. So with this bed, the first thing that I'm going to do is to spread out a little bit of blood and bone. Because I'm actually going to be putting some leafy greens into it, that little bit of extra nitrogen is useful. Don't need it so much with the snow peas that I'm also going to put in this bed. They don't really need the nitrogen, but they'll get that little bit. With the blood and bone spread, I'm actually then going to spread some compost. Now, this is fairly fresh commercial compost that I picked up a couple of days ago, and it's still quite hot. So if I spread it out and plant it immediately, it would be too hot for the young plants and for the seeds. You'll notice that I'm just adding a layer of this compost to the surface of the bed. I'm not going to dig it in at all. It just sits on the surface. How thick is it? Well, probably in the region of 40-50 millimeters. As I said, this is fresh green waste compost that has been made commercially. So being hot compost, it is seed free. Now, the beauty of that is that it gives me some significant seed suppression from weed seeds for quite a long time. And this is a type of gardening that I only use in my raised beds or occasionally in small sections of the larger garden. But what I find is it gives a really good start to seeds and to seedlings in terms of the fact that there's no competition. And by adding successively to the top rather than actually cultivating the soil, those weed seeds are getting progressively buried. Now, this, as I said earlier, is really quite hot. You can actually see steam coming off it as it's cooling. But in a couple of hours, this will have cooled down and I'll come back and plant. But while I'm waiting for that to happen, we need to go and prepare another bed. This bed here in the greenhouse, I want to prepare to plant some more leafy greens into it, some lettuce, some rocket, things like that that will come really quickly early in the spring. And of course, with the heat here in the greenhouse, I can feel warmth in here already with a little bit of sun coming through. They will come really quickly. I've got a lot of parsley in here now. I do have other parsley planting as well. I probably will thin this parsley out as it grows a little bit, but there's enough space in between the parsley for me to get the lettuce and other greens growing. I'm really wanting to prioritise them rather than the parsley, but the parsley is a really good green right now. that we can utilize, so I'll leave as much of it as I can. So first thing is to get the irrigation out of the road, to clean some of the weeds out. I will also add some blood and bones, scratching that in, the same as I have outdoors, and then come back and put a layer of compost over the top. Now, if anyone is wondering or concerned about me putting this hot compost around the parsley plants, I'm doing a couple of things in consideration of that. One, I've put the hottest compost furthest away from the plants. I've deliberately chosen compost that was on the edge of the heap to go close to the plants, because that compost from the edge is cooler. The other thing really is that with these parsley plants, the roots are established and are in the ground. So if it was a little bit of heat on the leaves themselves, it's not going to, or not very likely to kill the plants, or probably won't even damage them. Because the third thing that I've done is that I came in and watered the parsley plants, washing off any compost that was actually on the leaves. The risk of damage or impact really is this hot compost in terms of young seedlings, like planting directly in there with their soft roots, that it could be too hot, or putting seeds in where it may still cook the seed, though it cools very quickly once you spread it out like this. And it's only going to be, as I said, an hour or two, and this is going to come down to an acceptable temperature to plant in. Any residual warmth will actually be a good thing, because it will actually help germination. But you can actually test it with your fingers. Right now I put my fingers in and say it's too hot. So I'm going to go and have some lunch, and then I'll come back and we'll continue with planting in the garden. Well, I'm back from lunch, and we had a little downpour of rain. It's still trying to rain a little bit outside, though it's clearing very quickly. But while I'm waiting for that so I can get back outside and do some other planting, I thought I'd get these seeds in. It hasn't been the 2 hours, but the compost has cooled quite quickly, and it's now at a temperature that I'm quite confident and feel it's safe to put the seeds in. Besides, once they're in there, I will water it straight away anyway. But before I do, I'd just like to talk about the parsley for a moment. Now, I didn't actually plant any of the parsley that's in this patch. It's all volunteer. I have managed with volunteer parsley in the greenhouse here for a number of years now. What I do is simply allow 1 or 2 plants to go to seed each year, and then allow it to self-germinate. I then will quite often move some of those plants to another bed, because it just depends how I'm managing beds here. Sometimes I'm wanting to change what I'm growing in that bed. So as you may have seen in past videos, I had parsley in here, I've had parsley over in the other beds here, and it migrates around from season to season. But so in this bed, we've got over that side a lot of young parsley that is volunteer, that's germinated itself. I have moved some, as I said earlier, to another bed, which will be the parsley that I want to allow to grow more than this. And in these corners here, and along here, there's some old plants that come from the previous season. Now, I will allow probably a couple of these to actually stay here and grow up to seed, to actually give seed for the next crop. Because the parsley that has grown through the whole season over winter will then bolt very quickly in the spring and give you seed for the next year. So that's what's happening with the parsley. Now, what am I planting in here today? I've got a little bit of rocket, and the rocket is one that I have bought. I don't grow a lot of rocket. I personally really enjoy rocket, but my wife doesn't like it. I haven't yet really exposed the children to a lot of it, so I'm hopeful that if I grow a little bit, I can persuade the children to like it, and we'll get a little bit of rocket into the salads or into a sandwich here and there. I'll put a plant or two around, just putting a few seeds in. And look, you don't need to cover these deeply. Scatter a few and I'll thin them out as they come up. So there's that tiny bit has gone into each corner of the bed, and we'll see what we get from that. Now, I've got two types of lettuce here. One is Simpson's. Simpson's or Australian yellow are basically the same in my experience, other than a different colour seed. But they have the same growing habit, and they're a lettuce we really like, and so it's probably going to be the main lettuce that I want to grow in here. It's a lettuce that you can use basically picking out the leaves as you go, or you can pick the whole lettuce once it's grown to a reasonable size. But it is an open lettuce, it's not a hearting lettuce. So I'll plant those through this area here where there's more space. And again, I'm not really planting them very deep. I'm just putting a little pinch of seed here and there and just scratching the surface over, really. They need a fair bit of space, these lettuce, because they grow fairly big. The next one is a seed that I've kept myself, and I only know it as a Chinese lettuce. It's a loose leaf, very similar to an oak leaf lettuce, but still that slight difference. And it's a lettuce that I've been growing for probably 40 years and have either kept the seed or allowed it to volunteer in the garden. And so it's continued on. And I'm just going to put a little bit of that up around this end. And just a little bit. So that's the lettuce and the rocket planted. So this bed should give us a nice amount of greens. It'll come up really quick. I'll get some water on here now, and that'll cool things off and get the germination underway. Right, we're back to this bed, and it's had a good water from the rain while we've been away from it. So very slight warmth in there now, but nothing of concern. Now I want to plant two things into this bed. One is some snow peas. So the first thing I'll need to do that is actually put up the trellis and get that erected. The second thing that I'll put in this bed is the English spinach plants that I've got. So naturally I'm erecting the snow peas on the southern side, which is the side that the sun doesn't shine on here in Tasmania, and so that gives the space for the spinach on the north where it'll get the nice sun. So what I'm putting in here is Oregon dwarf snow peas. Now these are really easy to plant. I use the homie just to run a little furrow into the compost, not penetrating to the soil, just the compost. Now I'm planting snow peas because we like snow peas. They're easy, simple things to use in the kitchen. But you could plant any time of pea this time of the year. These peas I could have planted earlier, but coming from this time of the year when spring is around the corner, they will move away very, very quickly. If you plant them back when it's colder, they'll grow very slow across winter. But going in this time of the year, they're just going to jump away. So I'll just backfill over that. So with spinach, I've bought these plants. Now, sometimes I grow from seed, but I usually find when it's first thing in the late winter or spring, I'm putting the first lot of spinach in, that by the time I realise I can plant it, I probably should have planted it. So I end up going and buying some seedlings as a quick way of getting it underway. And so that's what I'm doing today. And I'll just break these up. I'm going to put them in fairly close, but I've got 2 punnets to go in this area, reasonable size space for them. English spinach is our spinach of preference, but everybody has their own, and some people like silver beet, some people like perpetual. Try a few and see which you prefer. This type of weather is the best time to get it in because there's a lot of cloud around, occasional rain, and it's really going to settle in well and take off easy, not going to be under stress. Okay, so this bed's now planted, but I haven't finished yet. I've got one more planting job to do before I finish today. So the last planting job that I want to do today is to put some broad beans into this section. Now, I've had it under plastic because I rotary hoed it earlier when the ground was still a lot drier. If I had left it uncovered and was trying to prepare the soil now, it would be mud pies. So by having it pre-prepared, it's ready for me to come in. All I need to do now is break it out and it'll be ready to plant. There's a few stray potatoes in here that are remnants from the last crop that was grown, which was potatoes. So I'll try and remove those now that they've germinated a little and I can find them. With it raked out, I'm using the wheel hoe to run some furrows in. I'll put a light dusting of blood and bone into these furrows, just enough to kick-start the beans, and then come back through with the wheel hoe just to stir that blood and bone in a little bit. And then it's time to come back and plant. Now, I keep my own broad bean seed, and from year to year, just keep planting it again and keeping it, and it does pretty well. I plant broad beans this time of the year, which is late winter, August, rather than late autumn as many people do. The reason being that I like the way they just come away with the spring, and they very quickly then move on, flower without any hesitation and develop pods. Whereas if you plant them before, they will grow a lot of bush, but they won't set beans until the springtime comes around. But whichever way you choose to do them, they are one of the easiest plants to grow in Tasmania. A very simple source of food, and one that will store well also in a number of ways. So one of my recommended plants to add into a garden. A lot of people don't like broad beans, and if you're one of those, you might consider going and watching a video I made a couple of years ago about broad bean growing and how to make homers from fresh broad beans. And it's often a way which people that don't like broad beans can still enjoy eating them. The final stage is to cover them back in with the wheel hoe, and I will come back once they germinate and start to grow. I will come back and hill them with the wheel hoe as well. That will help control weeds and also give them more support from wind. So with that, today's planting is complete, which is good because I think it's going to rain again soon. The clouds are gathering. Now, I have done a couple of other things in preparation for spring that you might be interested in. One is that yesterday, when it was really bucketing down with rain, I went into the planting house and put in some tomato seeds into some punnets. I don't have any film of that. The rain was too heavy, it was too dark, but they are now sitting over the wood heater, and there they'll warm up and hopefully germinate quickly. So it's still like 2 months or more before I will plant those out into the ground, but getting the seed going now gives me that little bit of head start, and hopefully by the time they're ready to go into the ground I have some nice little plants. The other thing is that I do have some onion seeds growing in egg cartons, the same as I did last year, that will be clumps, and I'll plant those out here beside where these broad beans are, but they still have a little bit of growing to do. Also, you might have noticed at the beginning that I had a punnet of broccoli plants which I have purchased, and the bed is ready to put them in, but I'm not going to do it today because the plants are a little bit too small still. So another few days, maybe a week, and they will have grown enough for me to plant them out. So for us here in Tasmania, as you've seen, it's time to get underway with some of these early things. All the best with your gardening, and I'll be back soon with another video.